Hello to all of you listening souls, wherever you are in the world, whatever time it might be on your clock. I'm your storyteller, and tonight I want to welcome you into a different kind of space. A space woven from regret, a broken promise, and a vision that could reshape our very world. The story I'm about to tell isn't a fairy tale. It begins with a very real loss, a pain that perhaps every one of us has tasted. The guilt of not speaking up when we should have. My best friend, the most brilliant soul I ever knew, was executed. His crime? He told stories, true stories. And in a world built on lies, the truth is the most radical form of treason. I lived in the shadow of my own silence until one night he returned, not as a ghost, but as something far grander and far more terrifying. He came back and gave me a task, a sacred burden, to write down the last memory of mankind before it's erased forever. This journey will take us to burned libraries, to the corrupt heart of a gilded empire, and even to the design chamber of the universe itself. We will face villains who are not horned monsters, but charismatic masters of manipulation. There will be battles, yes, but they will be fought not with swords, but with truth. And the ending, Aram, I promise you, is not what you think. It's not about good versus evil. It will change how you see truth, sacrifice, and the infinite power of a story told at the right time. Before we dive into that darkness to find the light, I want to know where you are on this journey with me. Leave a comment below. Let me know what city, what country you're listening from, and what time it is for you right now, so that we, across the miles, can share this moment together. Now take a deep breath. The story of the Scribe's revelation begins. The wind on this island always tastes of salt and decay. It slips through the cracks of the archive where I am exiled, whispering tales of forgotten things. This isn't a library, it is a tomb built of parchment and leather, where a million truths are slowly dying in the silence. My name is Kalen, a scribe, a recorder of deeds, but now my only job is to watch history be unwritten. Our gilded empire, once so magnificent, has become a great machine for manufacturing oblivion. Statues of great thinkers are torn down, replaced by the placid, unthinking face of the imperator. Books are burned not for warmth, but to extinguish the sparks of independent thought. History is rewritten daily, hourly, until no one can remember what yesterday truly looked like. And I, a small cog in that machine, once aided its function with my silence. My deepest haunt is not the loneliness of this island. It has a name, Liran, my best friend. He was no scholar or nobleman. He was a wanderer, a drifter with eyes that saw through the veils others built, and a mouth that knew no fear. He walked the lands telling the stories the empire wanted buried, songs of cultures that had been silenced, truths of unjust wars painted as glorious crusades, prophecies of a world where people didn't need walls of lies to feel safe. I remember our last conversation as if it were etched in glass. Under the flickering candlelight of my shabby attic room, he'd said, "Kalen, they fear our stories more than an enemy's sword. A sword can only kill the body, but a true story can kill an entire empire." I had trembled. I had urged him to be cautious, to be quiet. I told him silence was the price of survival. He had only looked at me, not with disappointment, but with a deep, aching pity. "No, my friend," he said softly. "Silence is the price of existence. To live, that is something else entirely." Weeks later, they took him. The orator, the empire's silver-tongued propagandist, whose voice was honeyed poison, stood in the Grand Plaza and declared Liran a purveyor of dangerous narratives. He called Liran's truth a toxin to stability. And I stood there in the crowd, mute. I let fear strangle the words in my throat. I watched them execute my only friend, and a part of me died with him on that platform. This exile wasn't a punishment. It was the Empire's version of mercy. They thought that by throwing me here amongst the rotting scrolls, I would forget. They were wrong. Here, the silence doesn't bring peace. It amplifies the screaming voice of my regret. Every night I dream of Lyran's eyes. Until one night, a fever took me not of the body, but of a soul worn thin. I lay on the cold stone floor, loose pages fluttering around me like pale ghosts. And then the room was no longer a room. The walls dissolved into an infinite expanse of light and shadow. In the center of it he stood, Lyran, but not the wanderer in his tattered clothes. He was woven from the light of stars themselves. He was a brilliant, solemn entity, a great architect. He did not speak with his mouth. His voice bloomed directly inside my mind, not a whisper, but a resonant thunder that carried the sorrow of a universe. "Kalen," the voice echoed, "the great machine of forgetting is grinding the final fragments to dust. They are not just erasing the past, they are erasing the very possibility of a future. Memory is not just what was, it is the foundation of what can be." I trembled, unable to form a word. "They took my voice," he continued, and I felt a timeless grief in his words. "But they could not take your hand. You are a scribe. Do your work. Write down what is being unwritten. Record the last memory, for it is the key to unlock a door they are trying to seal forever." The vision snapped shut. I awoke, drenched in sweat, my heart a war drum in my chest. My hand was still shaking, but for the first time in years, it was not from fear. It was shaking with purpose. My mission had been given, not by a distant god, but by the friend I had betrayed. This was not just a task. This was my penance, my redemption. With this quill, I would fight an empire. I would become the memory of a dying world. The plan began to form in my mind, clear and urgent. I could not face the Imperator's armies head-on, but I could plant seeds of truth, sent to the few patches of fertile ground left in the desert of deceit. The 7 great hubs of knowledge in the Empire, the last faltering bastions of reason. I began to write not as an exile, but as a messenger from the future. My first message I sent to the observatory on Silent Peak, where my old colleague, a brilliant astronomer named Ilara, was now forced to teach that the stars were mere decorations hung in the sky by the Imperator. In a code only we two knew, I wrote, "Ilara, remember the true map. They can change the textbooks, but they cannot move the Milky Way an inch. Look up. The answer is not in the Imperator's decrees. It is written in fire across the black tapestry. Show them the truth, even if it is only one student. A single spark is enough to set a forest ablaze." My second message went to the Institute of Philosophy in the city of Echo Valley, where free debate had been replaced by the mindless chanting of state-approved slogans. I wrote to its director, an old man whose heart had been calcified by fear. "Honored director, Socrates did not die from drinking hemlock. He died from asking a question. The question is our greatest inheritance, not the answer. Allow one question to be voiced in your halls. Just one. Why? And watch the walls of lies begin to crack." And so it went. I sent my messages out. To the great library where books were being burned, I urged them to become living books themselves. To the Academy of Music where heroic symphonies were forbidden, I reminded them that silence has its own rhythm, the rhythm of defiance. To the sculptors' workshops where they were only permitted to carve the Imperator's likeness, I whispered, "Look to the discarded stone. In it are the forms waiting to be freed." Each message sent was not just a call to action, it was a remembrance. I recalled my endless debates with Lyran. He believed in the explosive power of the spoken truth. I believed in the quiet, enduring power of the written word. "Your words fly on the wind, Lyran," I once said, "but my letters remain. They are patient. They wait." Now I understood we were never in opposition. We were both right. It took the voice of the prophet and the hand of the scribe. We were two sides of the same sacred coin, and I could feel it. A subtle shift in the ether. My messages sent by secret channels were finding their marks. I imagined Alara covertly showing a child the true shape of Orion. I imagined a young student in the Institute of Philosophy, frowning for the first time after hearing a slogan. They were small ripples, so small, but I knew, and Lyran knew, that a tidal wave always begins with a ripple. My war was not a loud one. It was a war of whispers, an insurrection of ink and paper against iron and steel, and it had just begun. In the weeks that followed, the visions returned, no longer as disjointed fever dreams, but as a continuous flowing current, pulling me from the reality of my island into a place beyond all imagining. It was not heaven or hell. It was a concept, a space I can only call the design chamber. And in the center of it all, magnificent and terrifying, was it, the grand design. It wasn't a scroll as we understand it. It was a living thing. It seemed to be woven from solidified sunlight and polished darkness. It emitted a low, resonant hum, the sound of every law of physics working in harmony. Its surface rippled with fleeting images, the rise of an empire, the bloom of a flower, the death of a star, the first cry of a newborn. It was the entire truth of what was, what is, and what will be, bound up as one. And it was sealed. 7 seals, each made not of wax, but of condensed concepts. The first seal was time, the second was space, the third was life, and so on. They were inviolable locks. Surrounding the grand design were powerful diaphanous entities, whom I could only perceive as the custodians of reality. They were silent, their expressions solemn, tinged with a millennial sadness. A voice resonated belonging to no one in particular, as if the space itself were speaking. Who is worthy to break the seals and open the design? Who is brave enough to look upon the unvarnished truth and not be consumed by it? The silence that followed was so profound it felt like a physical weight. I saw the greatest generals of history shrink back. I saw the wisest philosophers bow their heads. I saw the most powerful kings shield their faces. Not one, not a single being in all of existence dared to touch it. And then the crushing reality of it fell upon me. I understood. My mission was more than just writing things down. That was just the first step. Lyran wanted me to witness this. He wanted me to understand the scale of the war. No one dared open the scroll because the complete truth was too much to bear. And if it remained unopened, the lies of the Empire would eventually become the only truth left. A counterfeit reality would completely overwrite the original. Despair hit me like a physical blow, a tidal wave that drowned my soul. I wasn't crying from fear. I was crying from the utter soul-crushing weight of my own inadequacy. I had failed Lyran. I had failed all of existence. I was just a scribe. How could I do what no god or king would dare? My tears fell, but they did not fall down. They floated in the space around me like shattered diamonds. It was in that moment, as I was about to dissolve into that despair, that he appeared. Not the starlit architect. It was Lyran, my friend, the wanderer. He walked out of the shadows in his same worn tunic, his feet bare and calloused, his face etched with hardship, but his eyes blazing with a fierce light. He didn't look at the powerful entities. He didn't look at the swirling universes. He looked only at the grand design. He walked forward slowly, deliberately. The great custodians parted for him, not in fear, but in reverence. The universe itself seemed to hold its breath. Lyran said nothing. He simply reached out his weathered hand, the hand that had kindled fires for the cold, the hand that had pointed out constellations in the night sky, the hand that had been shackled by the Imperator's guards, the hand of a man who had lived and died for the truth. He touched the first seal, the seal of time, and a miracle happened. The seal, which no power could move, dissolved under his touch like morning mist in the sunlight. A collective sigh of relief echoed through the design chamber. It came not from the entities, but from the grand design itself. It had been waiting. It had been waiting for one who did not seek power from it, but who simply sought to free the truth imprisoned within. The universe had rendered its verdict. Not the kings, not the generals, not the sages. Only he, Lyran, the wanderer, whom the world had rejected and executed, was worthy. When Lyran broke that first seal, I braced for Armageddon. I expected fire and floods, the plagues of ancient texts. But what was unleashed was far more subtle and far more devastating. Lyran did not release divine punishment. He released the truth. And the truth, in a world built on lies, is the greatest catastrophe of all. The first seal shattered. A rider on a pristine white horse burst forth, but he carried no bow for conquest. He carried a great polished mirror. He galloped across the empire, and his mirror reflected not the image of the viewer, but the image of the hidden fact. He held the mirror up to the Imperator's victory monuments, and instead of glory, they showed burning villages and the weeping faces of the innocent. The lie of glorious conquest was stripped bare. Soldiers began to look at their own hands, and for the first time they saw the blood on them. The second seal was opened. A rider on a fiery red horse appeared, holding a massive sword, but he did not strike anyone down. He simply raised the sword, and it severed the invisible threads of deception that held the society together. The lie of artificial peace was broken. The discord that had been simmering just beneath the surface erupted. Factions in the court, families feuding over power, neighbors suspicious of one another. All the cracks that had been plastered over with false smiles now burst open. The Civil War began not with the clash of steel, but with the first honest words spoken in generations. The third seal broke. The rider on the black horse carried a set of scales. He did not weigh gold, he weighed bread. He rode through the opulent markets of the gilded city and the starving hovels in its shadow. His scales exposed the brutal truth. While the granaries of the aristocracy were overflowing, the people were starving. The lie of universal prosperity became a bitter joke. The famine was not a result of a poor harvest, but of greed. And when they realized it, the hungry were no longer docile. The fourth seal at last was opened. A rider on a pale, deathly green horse emerged. His name was Death, but he carried no scythe. He carried a plague. But this plague did not strike the poor or the weak. It targeted the powerful, the insulated, those who thought themselves untouchable, who believed wealth could buy immortality. The lie of the empire's permanence dissolved into a fever dream. The Imperator, for the first time, coughed, and the entire empire shivered. I watched all this from my vision, horrified and awestruck. Lyran was not a destroyer. He was a surgeon. He was excising the cancerous lies that had metastasized throughout the body of society. The agony the world was experiencing was not a punishment. It was a symptom of a painful healing process. The world was not being cursed by an angry God. It was being poisoned by its own falsehoods, and now the poison was being purged. While the world outside convulsed in a fever of truth, my vision zoomed to the very heart of the disease. The gilded city, the capital of the empire. It was a place engineered to dazzle, to make one forget reality. Towers of fool's gold scraped the sky. Boulevards were paved with polished marble to reflect the images of the wealthy, and the air was thick with expensive perfumes to mask the stench of the surrounding slums. And at the center of this artifice, I saw the faces of its architects. First, the Imperator. He didn't look like a tyrant. He had the face of a father, a protector. His voice was a deep, reassuring baritone. He never commanded, he suggested. He ruled not with an iron fist, but with an embrace so tight it suffocated. He built his power on fear, but not the fear of his sword, the fear of chaos, the fear of the world outside his safe, artificial walls. He was a jailer who had convinced his prisoners they were being sheltered. But the true danger, the puppeteer pulling the strings, was another, the orator. He was the mind behind the Imperator's charm. He was the creator of the code of lies, the sophisticated propaganda machine that had turned the populace into marionettes. He understood human psychology better than anyone. He knew how to turn a half-truth into a perfect lie. He knew how to sow doubt, to inflame envy, to turn neighbor against neighbor. And as I looked at the orator's face, a painful memory surfaced. I recognized him. He had been a fellow scholar in my and Lyron's youth, a man of keen intellect, but a soul corroded by jealousy. He could not stand that Lyron, a mere drifter, commanded love and trust, while he, with all his knowledge, commanded only cold respect. He hadn't killed Lyron because Lyron was dangerous. He'd killed Lyron because he was envious. And now the orator, from his golden balcony, could feel the ripples I had started. He saw the questions beginning to sprout in the eyes of the people. He saw their fear being replaced by curiosity. He knew the source of this change. He knew of Calin, the exiled scribe. And so he began his campaign, not with armies, but with his weapon of choice, words. "Citizens of our great empire," his voice, magically amplified, boomed across the city. "A traitor seeks to undo our peace. A terrorist named Calin poisoned by his criminal friend, the vagrant Lyron. He seeks to finish the dirty work Lyron started. He wants to drown us in chaos. He wants to destroy everything we have built." Every word was a dagger in my heart. He was using my own memories, my own pain against me. He was twisting my friendship with Lyron into a conspiracy. He was turning truth into terrorism. The pain and rage inside me swelled. This war now was deeply personal. The world was no longer a symphony. It was a cacophony, a chaotic masterpiece conducted by the Empire's own actions. The 7 trumpets and 7 bowls of wrath from my vision were not separate plagues from on high. They merged into a single event, the final convulsive shudder of a dying planet. I called it the Symphony of Collapse. The first trumpet was not the blast of an angel. It was the groan of the earth itself. The forests, clear-cut to build palaces for the aristocracy, now gave way to massive landslides burying the towns below. Fires from overmined coal seams burned up from the ground, turning verdant fields to ash. The second trumpet was the scream of the ocean. The industrial waste and chemical runoff from the Gilded City's factories, secretly dumped for decades, had finally reached a tipping point. The sea turned the color of rust-red algae, then a black, oily sludge. Fish washed ashore in silver tides of death. Ships were not sunk by storms, but corroded by the very water they sailed upon. And so the symphony continued, each movement more horrific than the last. The rivers, the lifeblood of the cities, began to stink of pollution, and those who drank from them were stricken with a strange wasting sickness. The sky lost its color. It was veiled in a permanent gray smog from industrial smokestacks, turning the sun into a hazy, impotent smear. Light became a luxury, and the people of the Gilded City, who had lived in splendor, lit by crystal lamps and warmed by magical braziers, now faced the consequences. They weren't being punished by a supernatural force. They were harvesting precisely what they had sown. Their comfort had been built on the devastation of some faraway place. And now the bill had come due at their own doorstep. From my island, I witnessed it all through the eyes of my vision. Horror constricted my chest, but mingling with the horror was a cold understanding. This was not the end of the world. This was the end of a world. The world of lies, of irresponsible comfort, of infinite growth on a finite planet. This was the necessary fever to purge the body of its sickness. This pain was unavoidable. It was the price of rebirth. And my job as the scribe was to record every agonizing note of this symphony so that a future generation would never forget its melody. The crescendo of the symphony, the highest and most jarring note, had arrived. The imperator and the orator, facing the total collapse of the order they had created, decided to do what all tyrants do when their power is challenged. They raised an army for one final war. They needed a physical enemy to blame for all the calamities, and that enemy was Calin and the rebels who had listened to his whispers. The imperial army, a sea of black lacquered armor assembled outside the gilded city. They looked immense, invincible. The orator stood on a high platform, his voice straining to rally their last reserves of loyalty. "Look, the chaos these traitors have brought. Only the Imperator can restore order. Fight for the future of your children." But his words sounded hollow this time, lost in the groaning of the earth and the thickness of the air. And then he appeared. Lyran materialized on a hill opposite the army. He was alone. He carried no weapon. He had no legions. He was just a single small figure against a tide of steel. In his hands he held the grand design, now fully unfurled, glowing with a soft, warm light. The Imperator scoffed. "A drifter and a scroll, is this all they have?" He gave the signal to charge. The army roared and began its advance. The ground trembled. The final battle seemed inevitable. And that is when the twist occurred. From the grand design, a river of light poured forth. It was not a destructive lightning bolt. It was not a consuming fire. It was a gentle, luminous mist that spread across the battlefield, passing through armor, through flesh, and shining directly into the deepest part of every soul. It was the unvarnished truth, and it did not attack. It revealed. A soldier, his spear raised high to strike an unseen enemy, stopped dead. In the light, he saw not a rebel. He saw the image of a farmer trying to protect his land, and the farmer's face looked just like his own father's. The spear fell from his hand. A general, screaming orders, fell silent. The light showed him the truth of the medals on his chest. Each one was not a symbol of glory, but a tombstone for the thousands of young men he had sent to die for a lie. He sank to his knees, his face in his hands. The light enveloped the orator. He saw nothing but a single repeating scene. The moment he stood in the plaza, condemning Lyran. But this time he felt not the triumph of victory. He felt the petty fear and jealousy that had driven him. He saw the void in his own soul, a black hole he had tried to fill with power and the admiration of others. He collapsed, not from a blow, but from the weight of his own self-knowledge. And finally, the light touched the Imperator. The mighty emperor looked at his shining golden armor, but in the light of truth, he saw not a savior. He saw a frightened child, a boy who had built an entire empire just to hide from his own insecurity. All his power, all his grandeur, was just a thin blanket to cover a shivering soul. There was no battle, not a single drop of blood was spilled. The great army of the empire dissolved in silence. One by one, they lowered their weapons and turned away. They weren't fleeing, they were simply going home. The gilded city, the symbol of power, had fallen, not because it was destroyed by an outside enemy. It fell from within, the moment no one believed in the lies that held it together. The Imperator and the orator were left alone on an empty battlefield. Their power, which had seemed so absolute, vanished like smoke the moment no one believed in it. The final judgment came not from a sword. It came from a moment of collective, heartbreaking clarity, and it was more profoundly healing than any conquest could ever be. After that silent confrontation, an extraordinary stillness fell upon the world. The sower of forgetfulness, the primordial evil that had been the rot at the core of the empire, was not vanquished by a thunderbolt. It was trapped by the sheer weight of the truth, a light it could not endure, and was banished to a dark corner of reality. It did not die. It was simply forgotten, the most ironic and fitting punishment of all. And so humanity entered a new epoch, an era the survivors came to call the Millennium of Silence. This was not a silence of fear or oppression. It was the silence of listening. Listening to the earth as it slowly healed. Listening to the buried stories as they were finally told. No new king was crowned. No new empire was forged. Instead, people began to walk. They walked from village to village, not to conquer, but to share. They sat around fires, not to plan wars, but to tell tales. An old soldier recounted the truth of a battle he'd fought. A farmer shared the ancient songs of her ancestors. A scientist explained the movement of the stars without fear of punishment. And I, Kalen, finally left my island of exile. The archive was no longer a tomb. It had been a seed bank, and now its seeds had sprouted everywhere. I began my own journey. I walked the lands, and everywhere I went, I told the true story of Lyran. I no longer spoke of him with guilt and regret. I spoke of him with pride, with love, with understanding. I told of the wisdom in his eyes, the warmth in his smile, the courage in his words. I told of how he taught me that truth was not a weapon to be wielded, but a gift to be shared. In telling his story, I was not just giving his memory back to the world. I was healing the wound in my own soul. My penance slowly transformed into a deep and abiding peace. I had redeemed my failure not with one great deed, but with 1,000 small, honest conversations. After 1,000 years of this healing and sharing, the sower of forgetfulness made one last attempt. It did not raise an army. It whispered a subtle, final lie into the minds of the people. Truth is too painful. Memory only brings sorrow. Isn't it easier to forget, to build a new world with no past? But this time, something different happened. Humanity, now armed with 1,000,000 stories, with the understanding of their own scars, collectively recognized the whisper for what it was. They did not fight it. They did not try to destroy it. They simply ignored it. They looked at it, saw its empty nature, and turned back to their own stories. The ultimate evil was finally defeated, not by force, but by being rendered irrelevant through the conscious choice of a community that had learned its lesson. It became powerless not because it was chained, but because no one was listening anymore. And then one final vision came to me, not of terror or chaos, but of completion. The new heaven and new earth were not a different world created from nothing. They were our own world, reborn from the ashes, healed by its memories. And on that cleansed land, a new city began to rise. But its foundations were not made of stone or steel. Its foundations were made of stories. The new city, the city of memory, had no towers of power or opulent palaces. Instead, there was the avenue of kept promises, where people recounted the vows they had honored. There was the bridge of forgiveness, arching over a river that symbolized the mistakes of the past. There was the library of dreams, where every book was the personal story of a citizen, great or small. Every house was a memory. Every street was an epic. Every plaza was a place for telling and for listening. There was no temple in the city, for the entire city was a sacred space of shared truth. The light of the city came not from the sun or moon, but from the understanding in people's eyes as they looked at one another. And I, Kalen, now an old man, my hair as white as sea foam, sat on a bench in the plaza of the storytellers. I watched children listening, enraptured, as a woman recounted the tale of Lyran the Wanderer. His story had become a myth, a reminder of the power of one ordinary person who dared to speak the truth. As the sun set, bathing the city in a warm, golden light, I saw a fleeting image in the distance. It was Lyran, standing under the great tree of truth, smiling at me. A smile no longer touched by sorrow, but filled with peace and contentment. I smiled back. My burden was lifted. My mission was complete. I had given memory back to the world, and in the process, I had found myself. And so the story of Kalen, of Lyran, and of an entire world comes to its close. But perhaps it isn't an ending. It's a beginning. A reminder that our world, just like the one in the story, is built and shaped by the narratives we choose to tell and the ones we choose to believe. That, in its essence, is the mission of our channel. We believe that stories, when told with heart and honesty, have the power to connect, to heal, and to shine a light of understanding into the darkest corners. We are here to explore those stories with you. If you felt that power, if you believe that a story can change something, however small, in yourself or in the world around you, then become a part of this community. Become a part of our larger story. go ahead and press that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so that every time a new story is told, you'll be among the first to hear it, so that we can continue together to build a space where truth is cherished and memories are never forgotten. Thank you for lending me your valuable time on this journey. Have a peaceful night, and remember, always tell your story.